Deep beneath the cobblestone streets of Vatican City, behind walls that have guarded secrets for nearly 2,000 years, lies the most mysterious library on Earth. The Vatican Apostolic Library contains over 1.6 million books, 80,000 manuscripts, and countless documents that span the entirety of human civilization. But what if I told you that hidden within those ancient halls, locked away in vaults that no outsider has ever seen, might be something far more extraordinary than religious texts and historical chronicles? What if the Vatican Library isn't just preserving human knowledge, but serving as the world's most secretive alien archive? Picture this. You're walking through the hallowed corridors of the Vatican, past priceless Renaissance frescoes and marble statues that have watched over centuries of papal history. The air is thick with the weight of ages, and every footstep echoes with the whispers of 1,000 secrets. But beneath your feet, in chambers that don't appear on any official blueprint, something impossible waits in the darkness. Documents written in scripts that predate human civilization, star charts that map solar systems we've never discovered, and artifacts that challenge everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. Now, before you dismiss this as the ravings of a conspiracy theorist, consider this. The Vatican Library has been collecting manuscripts and text for over 600 years. They've gathered knowledge from every corner of the globe, from civilizations that rose and fell before recorded history began. Their agents, missionaries, and scholars have travelled to the most remote places on Earth, bringing back not just religious artifacts, but anything that might contain forbidden knowledge. And here's the kicker. Less than 3% of their collection has ever been made public. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about one of the most powerful institutions in human history, with resources that rival entire nations, systematically collecting and hiding knowledge for 6 centuries. What exactly are they protecting us from? Or perhaps the better question is, what are they protecting from us? The Vatican has always been shrouded in secrecy. Their archives contain documents that could rewrite history, topple governments, and shatter religious foundations. But what if some of those documents weren't written by human hands at all? What if, scattered among the papal bulls and medieval manuscripts, lie texts that originated from civilizations not of this world? I'm about to take you on a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about the Catholic Church, human history, and our place in the cosmos. We're going to explore evidence that's been hiding in plain sight, testimonies from Vatican insiders that have never been fully explained, and connections that stretch back thousands of years. This isn't just about aliens. This is about a cover-up so massive, so carefully orchestrated, that it makes every conspiracy theory you've ever heard look like child's play. But here's what makes this different from every other alien theory you've encountered. We're not talking about crashed UFOs in the desert or blurry photographs of lights in the sky. We're talking about a paper trail that leads directly to the heart of one of the world's most secretive institutions. We're talking about documents, artifacts, and testimonies that paint a picture so extraordinary, so carefully hidden, that you'll never look at the Vatican the same way again. And the best part? The evidence isn't buried in some remote government facility or hidden in the depths of Area 51. It's sitting right there in Rome, behind walls that millions of tourists walk past every single day, completely unaware of what lies beneath their feet. So buckle up, because over the next several parts of this investigation, we're going to dive deep into the rabbit hole. We're going to examine historical accounts that don't quite add up, architectural anomalies that serve no earthly purpose, and testimonies from Vatican employees who've seen things they were never supposed to see. We're going to trace connections between ancient texts and modern UFO encounters, explore the Church's surprisingly sophisticated astronomical research, and uncover why the Vatican has been one of the most vocal institutions calling for scientific openness about extraterrestrial life. By the time we're done, you'll understand why the Vatican Library might not just be the greatest repository of human knowledge on Earth, it might be the greatest repository of non-human knowledge as well. Now, I know what you're thinking. The Vatican? Really? The same institution that brought us the Inquisition and told Galileo that the Earth was the centre of the universe? How could they possibly be hiding evidence of alien contact? But that's exactly what makes this theory so compelling. The Catholic Church has survived for 2 millennia by adapting to new realities while maintaining absolute control over information. They've weathered scientific revolutions, political upheavals, and social transformations that have toppled empires, and they've done it by being incredibly, almost impossibly good at keeping secrets. Consider their track record. The Vatican Secret Archives, recently renamed the Vatican Apostolic Archives in a PR move that fooled absolutely no one, contain documents that span 1,000 years of history. These aren't just religious texts we're talking about. They have correspondence between popes and emperors, records of political conspiracies, scientific discoveries that were suppressed for centuries, and evidence of cover-ups that make Watergate look like a parking ticket. They've hidden scandals involving their own clergy, suppressed scientific discoveries that challenged their worldview, and maintained diplomatic secrets that could destabilize entire regions. If any institution on Earth has the experience, resources, and motivation to hide the greatest secret in human history, it would be the Vatican. But here's where it gets really interesting. In recent decades, the Vatican has undergone a remarkable transformation in their public stance on extraterrestrial life. They've not only acknowledged the possibility of life beyond Earth, they've actively encouraged the search for it. The Vatican Observatory, one of the oldest astronomical research institutions in the world, has been at the forefront of this effort. They've collaborated with NASA, funded cutting-edge research, and made statements that would have been considered heretical just a few generations ago. In 2008, the Vatican's chief astronomer, José Gabriel Funes, made headlines when he declared that the discovery of extraterrestrial life would not contradict Catholic doctrine. He went further, suggesting that alien life might even be part of God's plan. This wasn't some off-the-cuff remark by a rogue scientist. This was an official statement from one of the Vatican's highest-ranking astronomers, published in the Vatican's own newspaper. But why this sudden openness? Why is an institution known for its secrecy and conservatism suddenly leading the charge in the search for extraterrestrial life? Some would argue it's genuine scientific curiosity. Others might suggest it's a PR campaign to modernize their image. But what if it's something else entirely? What if they're preparing us for revelations they've been sitting on for centuries? Think about it from their perspective. If you were the keeper of humanity's greatest secret, proof that we are not alone in the universe, how would you handle it? You couldn't just dump it on the world overnight. The social, religious, and political implications would be catastrophic. You'd need to prepare society gradually, carefully conditioning people to accept new realities. You'd need to control the narrative, ensure that when the truth finally comes out, it doesn't destroy the very institution you've spent your life protecting. And that's exactly what we might be witnessing. The Vatican's recent openness about extraterrestrial life might not be a change of heart. It might be damage control. They might be preparing for a day when their secret can no longer be contained, when the evidence becomes so overwhelming that disclosure becomes inevitable. But what kind of evidence are we talking about? What could possibly be hidden in the Vatican Library that would justify centuries of secrecy? To answer that question, we need to go back to the beginning, back to the very foundations of the Catholic Church and the mysterious circumstances surrounding its rise to power. The early Christian Church was built on a foundation of miraculous events, divine revelations, and encounters with beings that claimed to come from heaven. The biblical accounts are filled with descriptions of angels, visions, and divine interventions that shape the course of human history. But what if these weren't metaphorical or spiritual encounters? What if they were literal, physical contact with beings from another world? Ancient texts describe encounters with beings who descended from the sky in vehicles of light, who possessed knowledge beyond human understanding, and who could perform feats that seemed impossible by the standards of their time. These beings communicated with humans, shared advanced knowledge, and left behind instructions that formed the basis of major world religions. Now, I'm not suggesting that Christianity is based on alien contact. That would be both reductive and offensive to billions of believers. But I am suggesting that some of the events described in ancient texts might have been interpreted through the limited understanding of their time. When ancient peoples encountered advanced technology, or beings with capabilities beyond their comprehension, they naturally interpreted these encounters through the lens of their existing beliefs about gods, angels, and divine intervention. The Vatican, as the inheritor of this tradition, would have access to the oldest, most complete records of these encounters. They would have original documents, eyewitness accounts, and physical evidence that has never been made public. Over the centuries, as they collected manuscripts from around the world, they would have discovered that similar encounters were recorded by other cultures, other civilizations, other belief systems. Imagine being a Vatican scholar in the 15th century, comparing biblical accounts of angelic visitations with Mayan records of sky gods, or Islamic texts describing jinn with Hindu accounts of vimanas. Imagine discovering that cultures separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of years were describing remarkably similar encounters with beings who claimed to come from the sky. What would you do with that information? How would you reconcile these accounts with existing religious doctrine? And more importantly, how would you handle physical evidence, artifacts, documents, or objects that seem to confirm these extraordinary claims? The answer, I believe, lies in the deepest vaults of the Vatican Library. Hidden away from public view, protected by layers of secrecy and misdirection, might be the most important collection of extraterrestrial evidence on Earth. Not crashed spacecraft or alien bodies, but something far more valuable: documentation, written records, star charts, technological blueprints, and historical accounts that prove beyond any doubt that Earth has been visited by beings from other worlds for thousands of years, and the Vatican, in their role as guardians of spiritual truth, made the calculated decision that humanity wasn't ready for this revelation. They chose to protect us from a truth that might shatter our understanding of ourselves, our religions, and our place in the universe. But times are changing. The world is becoming more connected, more scientifically literate, and more open to possibilities that previous generations would have rejected outright. The discovery of exoplanets, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and the growing acceptance of the possibility of life beyond Earth have created an environment where the Vatican's greatest secret might finally be ready for disclosure. But before we can understand what might be hidden in those ancient vaults, we need to examine the Vatican's long and complicated relationship with knowledge itself. Because here's something most people don't realize. The Catholic Church hasn't always been the enemy of science and discovery that popular culture makes them out to be. In fact, for much of history, they were science's greatest patron and protector. During the Dark Ages, when barbarian invasions and political chaos threatened to destroy the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world, it was Christian monasteries that preserved Greek and Roman texts. It was church scholars who maintained libraries, copied manuscripts, and kept the flame of learning alive. The Vatican didn't just collect religious documents. They were the guardians of human knowledge in all its forms. But here's where it gets interesting. As the Church's power and influence grew, so did their access to information that others couldn't obtain. They had missionaries in every corner of the known world, diplomatic relationships with every major power, and the resources to acquire rare manuscripts and artifacts that no one else could afford. They weren't just collecting Christian texts, they were systematically gathering knowledge from every culture they encountered. Think about what that means. When Spanish conquistadors encountered the advanced civilizations of the Americas, who do you think got first access to their codices, their star charts, their records of contact with sky beings? When Jesuit missionaries traveled to China and encountered texts that were thousands of years old, where do you think those documents ended up? When Crusaders returned from the Holy Land with scrolls and artifacts from the Library of Alexandria, texts that had supposedly been destroyed, where would they have taken them? The Vatican wasn't just passively collecting this information, they were actively seeking it out, often going to extraordinary lengths to acquire documents and artifacts that others considered worthless or heretical. And they had a very specific criterion for what they collected: anything that might shed light on divine revelation, angelic encounters, or contact between heaven and earth. Now imagine you're a Vatican librarian in the 16th century. You're cataloguing a new acquisition. Let's say it's a Mayan codex that describes the return of Kukulkan, the feathered serpent who descended from the sky in a vessel of light. As you translate the text, you realize it's describing events that are remarkably similar to biblical accounts of angelic visitations. The being is described as possessing advanced knowledge, the ability to travel through the sky, and characteristics that don't quite match any earthly creature. You compare this to other texts in your collection. A Sanskrit manuscript from India that describes vimanas, flying vehicles piloted by beings called devas. An Ethiopian text that recounts the visit of the Queen of Sheba to Solomon, but includes details about her arriving in a flying craft that aren't found in the biblical version. A collection of Dead Sea Scrolls that contain expanded accounts of Enoch's journey to heaven, complete with descriptions of advanced technology and non-human intelligences. Pattern after pattern begins to emerge. Culture after culture, separated by vast distances and centuries of time, all describing similar encounters with beings from the sky. Beings who possessed knowledge beyond human understanding, who could travel between worlds, and who claimed to have a direct connection to divine authority. What would you do with this information? How would you interpret these consistent accounts? And most importantly, How would you handle the growing realization that these might not be metaphorical or spiritual encounters, but literal, physical contact with beings from another world? The Vatican's response, I believe, was both pragmatic and profound. They recognized that this information was too important to ignore but too dangerous to reveal. They understood that proof of extraterrestrial contact would fundamentally challenge humanity's understanding of itself, its religions, and its place in the universe. So they made a decision that would shape the course of human history. They would preserve this knowledge, but they would keep it secret until humanity was ready to handle the truth. This wasn't necessarily a malicious decision. From their perspective, they were protecting humanity from information that could cause massive social upheaval, religious wars, and existential despair. They were buying time, allowing human civilization to develop the scientific and philosophical frameworks necessary to process such revolutionary revelations. But they weren't content to just passively guard these secrets. Evidence suggests that the Vatican has been actively preparing for eventual disclosure, carefully shaping public opinion and scientific understanding to create an environment where the truth can be revealed without causing civilizational collapse. Consider their approach to astronomy. The Vatican Observatory was founded in 1582, making it one of the oldest astronomical research institutions in the world. But why would a religious organization invest so heavily in studying the stars? The official explanation is that accurate calendar reform required precise astronomical observations, but that project was completed centuries ago, yet the Vatican continues to operate one of the world's most advanced astronomical research programs. They've built observatories in Italy, Arizona, and Argentina. They employ world-class astrophysicists and collaborate with leading scientific institutions. They've been involved in the search for exoplanets, the study of astrobiology, and research into the possibility of extraterrestrial life. This isn't just intellectual curiosity. This is a systematic, long-term effort to understand our place in the cosmos. In 2009, the Vatican hosted a major astrobiology conference, bringing together leading scientists from around the world to discuss the implications of discovering life beyond Earth. The keynote speakers included NASA researchers, SETI scientists, and experts in extraterrestrial biology. This wasn't a fringe event. This was an official Vatican symposium, endorsed at the highest levels of church hierarchy. During that conference, Vatican astronomers made statements that would have been considered heretical just a few generations earlier. They declared that the discovery of extraterrestrial life would not contradict Catholic doctrine. They suggested that alien civilizations might be part of God's plan for the universe. They even speculated about the possibility of intelligent life that might have evolved along different paths than humanity. But here's what's really interesting about these statements. They weren't presented as new theological positions. They were presented as clarifications of existing doctrine, as if the Church had always been open to these possibilities. As if they were simply making explicit what had always been implicit in their understanding of divine creation. This suggests something remarkable. The Vatican's public position on extraterrestrial life isn't evolving, it's being revealed. They're not changing their doctrine to accommodate new possibilities. They're gradually disclosing positions they've held privately for centuries, and this fits perfectly with what we know about how the Vatican handles sensitive information. They don't make sudden announcements or dramatic revelations. They test ideas through academic conferences, scholarly papers, and carefully worded public statements. They gauge public reaction, monitor social media, and adjust their approach based on how well their ideas are received. It's a process called trial balloons in political circles, floating ideas to see how they're received before committing to them fully. The Vatican has been floating trial balloons about extraterrestrial life for decades, and the response has been overwhelmingly positive. Scientists embrace the possibility, the general public is fascinated rather than frightened, and even religious communities have shown remarkable acceptance of the idea that God's creation might extend far beyond Earth. This suggests that the Vatican's decades-long campaign to normalize the idea of extraterrestrial life has been successful. They've created an environment where the revelation of alien contact wouldn't cause the mass panic or religious upheaval that they might have feared in earlier centuries. But they've also been careful to maintain control over the narrative. Notice that all of their public statements about extraterrestrial life come through their astronomical research programs, not their theological departments. They're framing this as a scientific issue, not a religious one. They're positioning themselves as objective observers seeking truth, not as guardians of secret knowledge. This is classic Vatican strategy. control the information, control the timing, and control the interpretation. They've spent centuries perfecting this approach, and they're applying it to what might be the most important revelation in human history. But what exactly are they preparing to reveal? What could be hidden in those vaults that would justify such an elaborate long-term disclosure strategy? To answer that question, we need to look at the clues they've already given us, the hints, references, and subtle admissions that have been hiding in plain sight for anyone willing to look closely enough, because the Vatican hasn't been completely silent about their extraterrestrial knowledge. They've been dropping breadcrumbs for decades, leaving a trail of evidence that points towards something extraordinary hidden in their archives. You just have to know where to look, and those breadcrumbs tell a story that's far more compelling than any Hollywood alien invasion movie. They tell the story of an institution that has been quietly documenting, cataloguing, and preserving evidence of non-human intelligence for centuries, all while maintaining the public facade of a traditional religious organization. Let's start with the most obvious clue: the Vatican's art. Walk through the halls of the Vatican museums, and you'll see something extraordinary hiding in plain sight. Paintings, frescoes, and sculptures that date back centuries, all depicting encounters with beings that don't quite look human. Angels with features that seem more technological than divine. Cherubs with large dark eyes and elongated skulls. Divine messengers arriving in objects that look suspiciously like spacecraft. Take Domenico Ghirlandaio's The Madonna with St. Giovannino, painted in the 15th century. In the background, clearly visible to anyone who looks closely, is a disc-shaped object hovering in the sky, with a man and his dog staring up at it in amazement. This isn't subtle religious symbolism. This is a UFO painted by one of the Renaissance's most celebrated artists, hanging in the Vatican's own collection. Or consider the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, painted by Michelangelo under direct papal commission. God's creation of Adam shows the divine figure surrounded by what appears to be the interior of a spacecraft, complete with flowing organic walls that look nothing like traditional religious imagery. The entire composition suggests that Michelangelo had access to descriptions or images of advanced technology that he incorporated into his religious artwork. These aren't isolated examples. The Vatican's art collection is filled with depictions of encounters between humans and beings that possess characteristics we now associate with extraterrestrial visitors. Large eyes, elongated limbs, advanced technology, and the ability to travel through the sky in vehicles that defy the understanding of their time. Now, art historians will tell you that these are simply stylistic interpretations of religious themes, that angels and divine beings were often depicted with otherworldly characteristics to emphasize their non-human nature. But that explanation becomes less convincing when you realize that many of these artists were working directly with Vatican theologians, using source materials that were housed in the papal libraries. What if these artists weren't creating imaginative interpretations of religious stories? What if they were working from actual descriptions, eyewitness accounts, or even physical evidence that was stored in the Vatican's archives? What if the Church commissioned these artworks not just to inspire faith, but to preserve visual records of actual encounters? This possibility becomes even more intriguing when you consider the Vatican's relationship with Renaissance artists. These weren't independent contractors working on their own interpretations of biblical stories. They were employees of the Church, working under strict supervision, using materials and references provided by Vatican scholars. Every detail of their work was reviewed, approved, and often modified by Church authorities. If Michelangelo painted God surrounded by what looks like spacecraft technology, it's because someone in the Vatican approved that imagery. If Ghirlandaio included a UFO in his painting of the Madonna, it's because Church authorities saw nothing problematic about that inclusion. These artistic choices weren't accidents or creative liberties. They were deliberate decisions made with the full knowledge and approval of the institution that commissioned them. But the artistic evidence is just the beginning. The real clues lie in the Vatican's own writings, in documents and statements that have been public for decades, but largely ignored by researchers who weren't looking for extraterrestrial connections. Take, for example, the Vatican's official position on miracles. Catholic doctrine requires extensive investigation before any event can be declared miraculous. They have teams of scientists, doctors, and investigators who examine every claimed miracle with skeptical scrutiny. They look for natural explanations, investigate possible fraud, and require multiple independent confirmations before accepting anything as genuinely supernatural. But here's what's interesting. A significant percentage of church-approved miracles involve phenomena that sound remarkably similar to modern UFO encounters. Lights in the sky that behave intelligently, healing events that involve exposure to unknown energy sources, apparitions of beings who claim to come from heaven but describe journeys through space and time, mass sightings of aerial phenomena that leave physical traces but can't be explained by conventional science. The most famous example is the miracle of Fatima in 1917, where 3 children reported encounters with a being they called Our Lady of Fatima. The entity appeared in a series of visions, delivered prophetic messages, and promised to perform a public miracle to prove the authenticity of the encounters. On October 13, 1917, approximately 70,000 people witnessed what became known as the Miracle of the Sun. Eyewitness accounts described the sun appearing to dance in the sky, changing colours, and moving in impossible patterns before seeming to plummet toward the earth. People reported that their rain-soaked clothes were instantly dried, and many claimed to see a silver disc spinning in the sky. The event was witnessed by believers and skeptics alike, including journalists and government officials who had come to debunk the children's claims. The Catholic Church investigated this event for years before officially recognizing it as a genuine miracle. But modern researchers have noted that the descriptions of the dancing sun are remarkably consistent with UFO sightings. The silver disc, the impossible movements, the energy effects that dried wet clothing. These are all characteristics commonly reported in extraterrestrial encounters. What if the miracle of Fatima wasn't a religious vision, but an extraterrestrial contact event that was interpreted through the religious framework of its time? What if the Our Lady of Fatima was an alien being communicating with humans, and the miracle was a demonstration of advanced technology? This interpretation becomes even more compelling when you consider the content of the messages delivered during these encounters. The entity spoke about future wars, technological developments, and global events that wouldn't occur for decades. It demonstrated knowledge of human history and future possibilities that seems to extend far beyond what a religious vision would typically contain. But here's the most intriguing part. The Vatican has never released the complete text of the third secret of Fatima. They claim to have revealed it in 2000, but many researchers believe that significant portions of the message remain classified. What could be so sensitive that the Vatican would keep it secret for over a century? Some speculate that the third secret contains information about the true nature of the encounters, that it reveals the extraterrestrial origin of the Our Lady of Fatima apparitions. Others suggest that it contains prophetic information about future contact events, or instructions for how humanity should prepare for eventual disclosure of alien presence. Whatever the truth, the Vatican's handling of the Fatima secrets follows their typical pattern: gradual, controlled release of information, always maintaining institutional control over the narrative. They've revealed enough to maintain credibility, but held back enough to preserve their authority over the interpretation of events. This pattern repeats throughout church history. Time and again, the Vatican has investigated and approved miraculous events that sound remarkably similar to modern UFO encounters. They've documented healing events involving unknown energy sources, apparitions of beings who claim to travel between worlds, and mass sightings of aerial phenomena that defy conventional explanation. But they've consistently interpreted these events through religious frameworks, describing them as divine interventions rather than extraterrestrial contacts. This isn't necessarily deception. It might simply reflect the interpretive tools available to them at the time. When your worldview is built around concepts of heaven, angels, and divine intervention, that's naturally how you'll interpret encounters with advanced non-human intelligence. The problem is that this religious interpretation might have prevented us from recognizing the true significance of these events. What we've been calling miracles might actually be documentation of ongoing contact between humans and extraterrestrial civilizations, carefully preserved in church archives but misunderstood due to the limitations of pre-scientific thinking. But the Vatican's own recent statements suggest that they're beginning to acknowledge this possibility. In 2010, Vatican astronomer Guy Consolmagno made a remarkable statement during a scientific conference. He suggested that if we encountered extraterrestrial intelligence, we might need to reconsider our interpretation of historical religious events. He specifically mentioned the possibility that some biblical accounts of angelic encounters might need to be re-examined in light of new scientific understanding. This wasn't a throwaway comment by a rogue scientist. This was an official Vatican astronomer speaking at a church-sponsored event suggesting that extraterrestrial contact might require us to reinterpret religious history. He was essentially admitting that some of the events recorded in sacred texts might have involved non-human intelligence from other worlds. But Consolmano went even further. He suggested that the Vatican's extensive archives might contain records that would be relevant to astrobiology research. He hinted that historical documents in church collections might provide insights into the long-term relationship between humans and non-terrestrial intelligence. He was practically advertising the fact that the Vatican archives contain extraterrestrial evidence, if only researchers knew how to look for it. These statements aren't accidents. The Vatican doesn't make casual remarks about sensitive topics. Every public statement is carefully crafted, reviewed by multiple levels of authority, and designed to serve specific institutional goals. When Vatican officials begin publicly discussing the possibility that their archives contain extraterrestrial evidence, it's because they're preparing the ground for eventual revelations. But they're also being careful to maintain control over the timing and interpretation of any disclosures. Notice that these statements always come from their scientific personnel, not their theological leadership. They're framing this as a scientific issue that might have religious implications, rather than a religious issue with scientific components. This distinction is crucial because it allows them to maintain doctrinal flexibility while preserving institutional authority. If extraterrestrial contact is revealed as a scientific fact, the Vatican can position itself as having always been open to the possibility. They can point to centuries of astronomical research, decades of astrobiology conferences, and years of public statements acknowledging the likelihood of alien life. But they can also maintain that this scientific discovery doesn't challenge fundamental religious truths, it simply expands our understanding of God's creation. They can argue that extraterrestrial civilizations are part of the divine plan, that contact with alien intelligence is consistent with Catholic doctrine, and that the Church has always been prepared for such revelations. It's a brilliant strategy that allows them to have it both ways. They can claim credit for being progressive and scientifically minded, while simultaneously maintaining that their core beliefs remain unchanged. They can present themselves as both guardians of ancient wisdom and pioneers of new understanding. But this strategy only works if they've actually been sitting on extraterrestrial evidence for centuries. If the Vatican archives truly contain proof of alien contact, then their recent openness about the possibility of extraterrestrial life isn't just good public relations. It's essential preparation for eventual disclosure, and the evidence suggests that's exactly what's happening. The Vatican's statements about extraterrestrial life have become increasingly specific and confident over the past decade. They're not just acknowledging the theoretical possibility of alien life, they're discussing the practical implications of contact, the theological questions it would raise, and the institutional responses it would require. In 2014, Vatican astronomer José Gabriel Funes went so far as to suggest that if we encountered extraterrestrial intelligence, the Church would be prepared to evangelize to alien civilizations. He discussed the possibility of alien souls, extraterrestrial spirituality, and the universal application of Christian doctrine across different worlds and species. Think about the implications of that statement. Funes wasn't just acknowledging the possibility of alien life, he was discussing missionary work to extraterrestrial civilizations. He was treating contact with alien intelligence as an inevitable future event that the Church needed to prepare for, not a remote theoretical possibility that might never occur. This level of confidence and specificity suggests that the Vatican's discussions of extraterrestrial life aren't based on speculation or wishful thinking. They're based on knowledge, specific, detailed knowledge about the nature of alien intelligence and the likelihood of future contact. And where would that knowledge come from? The most logical answer is their own archives. The Vatican has been collecting and preserving information about anomalous encounters for centuries. They have access to original documents, eyewitness accounts, and physical evidence that has never been made public. If anyone on Earth has definitive proof of extraterrestrial contact, it would be the institution that has been systematically documenting and investigating miraculous events for nearly 2,000 years. But they've also been extremely careful about how they handle this information. They haven't just been passively collecting evidence, they've been actively managing it, controlling access to it, and carefully preparing for the day when disclosure becomes inevitable. This management extends far beyond simply keeping secrets. The Vatican has been shaping the narrative around extraterrestrial life for decades, gradually conditioning public opinion to accept revelations that might once have caused mass panic. They've been working with scientists, collaborating with researchers, and funding studies that normalize the idea of alien intelligence. They've also been careful to position themselves as authoritative interpreters of any eventual disclosures. By establishing themselves as leaders in astrobiology research, they've ensured that when extraterrestrial contact is revealed, they'll be among the first institutions that people turn to for guidance and interpretation. It's a masterful long-term strategy that demonstrates the kind of institutional planning that only an organization with nearly 2,000 years of experience could execute. They're not just keeping secrets, they're actively managing the revelation of those secrets to ensure maximum institutional benefit and minimum social disruption. But this raises an even more intriguing question. What exactly are they preparing to reveal? What could be hidden in the Vatican archives that would justify such an elaborate, decades-long disclosure strategy? The answer, I believe, lies not just in isolated documents or artifacts, but in the comprehensive nature of their collection. The Vatican doesn't just have a few strange manuscripts or unusual objects. They have what might be the most complete record of human-alien contact in existence, a systematic documentation of extraterrestrial encounters spanning thousands of years, preserved in the world's most secure archive. And they're finally getting ready to share it with the world. But here's where the story takes an even more extraordinary turn. The Vatican's preparation for disclosure isn't just about managing public opinion or protecting their institutional interests. There's evidence to suggest they've been actively communicating with extraterrestrial intelligence for centuries, serving not just as archivists of alien contact, but as Earth's unofficial diplomatic corps with civilizations from other worlds. Consider the Vatican's unique position in global affairs. They maintain diplomatic relations with 183 countries, operate one of the world's most sophisticated intelligence networks, and have representatives in virtually every corner of the globe. But their influence extends far beyond earthly politics. They've positioned themselves as humanity's spiritual authority, claiming jurisdiction not just over human souls, but over the moral and ethical questions that would arise from contact with non-human intelligence. This isn't accidental. For an institution that thinks in terms of centuries and millennia, the Vatican has been remarkably prescient about the implications of extraterrestrial contact. While other organizations have focused on the technological aspects of alien encounters, the spacecraft, the weapons, the scientific discoveries, the Vatican has been preparing for the philosophical and spiritual challenges that contact would create. What happens to human religious beliefs when we discover we're not alone in the universe? How do we reconcile our understanding of divine creation with the existence of multiple intelligent species? What ethical frameworks do we use when dealing with beings whose moral systems might be completely alien to our own? These are the questions the Vatican has been quietly working on for decades, and their answers might be hidden in the deepest vaults of their library, but they haven't been working on these questions in isolation. Evidence suggests that the Vatican has been in communication with extraterrestrial intelligences, receiving guidance about how to prepare humanity for eventual contact. The consistency of their recent statements about alien life, the confidence with which they discuss future encounters, and the specificity of their preparations all point toward ongoing dialogue with non-human intelligence. Think about it from an alien perspective. If you were an advanced extraterrestrial civilization planning to make contact with humanity, which earthly institution would you approach first? You'd want an organization with global influence, institutional stability, and experience managing sensitive information. You'd need partners who could help prepare humanity psychologically and spiritually for the paradigm shift that contact would create. You'd want intermediaries who could serve as bridges between your civilization and human society. The Vatican checks every box. They have nearly 2 billion followers worldwide, institutional continuity spanning 2 millennia, and unparalleled experience in managing revolutionary information. They've successfully guided humanity through scientific revolutions, political upheavals, and social transformations that have toppled other institutions. If anyone could help manage first contact, it would be them. And there's evidence that this collaboration has been ongoing for much longer than most people realize. The Vatican's astronomical research didn't begin in the modern era, it stretches back to the very foundations of the Church. Some of Christianity's most important figures were also accomplished astronomers, mathematicians, and researchers into what we would now call extraterrestrial phenomena. Take St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the Church's greatest theologians. In the 13th century, he wrote extensively about the possibility of life on other worlds, discussing the theological implications of multiple, inhabited planets in terms that seem remarkably modern. He didn't approach this as theoretical speculation. He wrote with the confidence of someone who had access to definitive information about the nature of the universe. Or consider Giordano Bruno, the Dominican friar who was executed by the Inquisition in 1600 for his heretical beliefs about the universe. Bruno claimed that stars were distant suns surrounded by inhabited planets, that the universe was infinite and filled with life, and that Earth was just one of countless worlds hosting intelligent beings. The official story is that Bruno developed these ideas through philosophical reasoning. But what if he had access to information that proved the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations? Bruno's execution is often cited as evidence of the Church's hostility towards scientific discovery, but that interpretation might be backwards. What if Bruno wasn't killed for developing revolutionary ideas, but for revealing information he wasn't supposed to share? What if his execution was meant to protect secrets that the Church wasn't ready to disclose? This possibility becomes more compelling when you consider the selective nature of Church persecution. Many scholars developed ideas that challenged official doctrine without facing execution. The difference with Bruno was that his claims were specific, detailed, and seemingly based on information rather than speculation. He didn't just theorize about life on other worlds, he described it with a confidence that suggested direct knowledge. The Vatican's treatment of Galileo tells a similar story. The official narrative is that Galileo was persecuted for supporting the heliocentric model of the solar system, but the historical record is more complex. Galileo had been teaching heliocentric astronomy for years without facing Church opposition. The problems began when he started making claims about inhabited worlds and intelligent life throughout the universe, claims that went far beyond what his telescopic observations could support. What if Galileo, like Bruno before him, had access to information about extraterrestrial civilizations that the Church considered too sensitive for public disclosure? What if his persecution was meant to silence claims about alien life, rather than astronomical theory? This pattern repeats throughout Church history. Time and again, the Vatican has suppressed not scientific discovery itself, but specific claims about extraterrestrial life and contact with non-human intelligence. They've been remarkably tolerant of astronomical research, mathematical innovation, and even theories that challenge geocentric cosmology, but they've consistently moved to silence anyone who claimed direct knowledge of alien civilizations. This suggests a clear institutional policy. The Vatican supports scientific research into the possibility of extraterrestrial life, but maintains strict control over information about actual contact. They're not anti-science. They're pro-secrecy when it comes to their most sensitive archives. But maintaining that secrecy has become increasingly difficult in the modern era. The democratization of information, the rise of independent research, and the growing sophistication of amateur investigators have made it harder for any institution to keep secrets indefinitely. The Vatican seems to recognize this reality, which might explain their recent shift toward controlled disclosure. Rather than waiting for their secrets to be exposed by outside researchers, they're taking proactive steps to manage the revelation of extraterrestrial information. They're positioning themselves as authoritative sources on astrobiology, building credibility through legitimate scientific research, and gradually preparing public opinion for disclosures that might once have seemed impossible. But they're also being careful to maintain institutional control over the narrative. Notice that their discussions of extraterrestrial life always emphasize the role of divine providence in any contact scenarios. They're not just acknowledging the possibility of alien civilizations, they're claiming spiritual jurisdiction over any relationships that might develop between humans and extraterrestrial beings. This isn't just theological positioning, it's practical preparation for a role they expect to play in future contact scenarios. The Vatican isn't just preparing to reveal evidence of past alien encounters, they're preparing to serve as intermediaries in ongoing relationships with extraterrestrial civilizations. And the evidence for these ongoing relationships is hidden throughout their public statements, if you know how to read between the lines. Vatican astronomers don't just discuss the theoretical possibility of alien life. They talk about it with the specificity and confidence of people who have direct knowledge. They discuss the ethics of contact, the protocols for communication, and the institutional responses that would be required, details that go far beyond what theoretical speculation would provide. In 2016, Vatican Observatory Director Guy Consolmagno made a remarkable statement during a scientific conference. He said that if humanity encountered extraterrestrial intelligence, the Vatican would be prepared to serve as Earth's welcoming committee. He didn't present this as a hypothetical scenario. He spoke as if alien contact was an inevitable future event that the Church was actively preparing for. But here's what's most interesting about that statement. Consul Magno wasn't volunteering for a role that didn't exist. He was describing responsibilities that the Vatican apparently already believes it has. He was talking about serving as Earth's welcoming committee as if that was an established institutional mission, not a theoretical possibility. This suggests that the Vatican's relationship with extraterrestrial intelligence might be far more advanced than their public statements indicate. They might not just be preparing for future contact. They might already be serving as humanity's representatives in ongoing diplomatic relationships with alien civilizations. The implications of this possibility are staggering. If the Vatican has been in communication with extraterrestrial intelligences, then their archives don't just contain historical records of past encounters. They contain ongoing documentation of humanity's relationship with alien civilizations, diplomatic correspondence, technological exchanges, and collaborative agreements that span centuries or even millennia. This would explain the Vatican's confidence about future contact scenarios. It would explain their sophisticated understanding of the implications of extraterrestrial relationships. And it would explain why they've been so careful to maintain institutional control over information about alien life. But it would also explain why disclosure has been so gradual and carefully managed. If the Vatican has been serving as Earth's unofficial diplomatic corps with extraterrestrial civilizations, then revealing that relationship would fundamentally change humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. It would mean that we've never been alone, that we've been part of a galactic community for thousands of years, and that our entire understanding of human history and development has been incomplete. Such a revelation would require extraordinary preparation. It would challenge every assumption about human independence, terrestrial isolation, and the development of civilization. It would force us to reconsider everything from religious doctrine to scientific theory to political philosophy. The Vatican seems to understand this challenge, which is why their disclosure strategy has been so methodical. They're not just revealing the existence of extraterrestrial life, they're preparing humanity for the revelation that we've been part of an interplanetary community all along, with the Vatican serving as our representatives in relationships we never knew existed. But they're also preparing for the practical implications of full disclosure. If the Vatican reveals that they've been in communication with extraterrestrial civilizations, they'll need to justify centuries of secrecy. They'll need to explain why this information was kept hidden, what agreements were made on humanity's behalf, and what commitments exist for future cooperation. This is where the Vatican's institutional experience becomes crucial. They've managed similar revelations before, successfully guiding humanity through paradigm shifts that seemed impossible until they happened. They understand how to present revolutionary information in ways that minimize social disruption, while maximizing institutional credibility. They also understand the importance of timing. The Vatican's recent statements about extraterrestrial life haven't been random or reactive. They've been part of a carefully orchestrated campaign to prepare public opinion for revelations that might be coming sooner than most people expect. Consider the acceleration of their public statements over the past decade. Vatican astronomers have gone from acknowledging the theoretical possibility of alien life to discussing the practical implications of contact to describing their institutional preparations for serving as humanity's representatives in future encounters. That's not the timeline of theoretical speculation. That's the timeline of an organization preparing for imminent disclosure. But they're not the only ones. Governments around the world have been releasing previously classified information about UFO encounters. Scientific institutions have been acknowledging the possibility of extraterrestrial visitation. Military organizations have been admitting that they've encountered technologies they can't explain or replicate. This coordinated disclosure across multiple institutions suggests that we're approaching a moment of truth, a point where the reality of extraterrestrial contact becomes impossible to deny or suppress. And when that moment arrives, the Vatican wants to be positioned as humanity's most trusted source of information about our relationship with alien civilizations. But they also want to be positioned as the institution best equipped to guide humanity through the challenges that full disclosure will create. They're not just revealing secrets, they're positioning themselves as indispensable partners in humanity's transition to become a recognized member of a galactic community. This long-term strategy demonstrates the kind of institutional thinking that only an organization with nearly 2,000 years of experience could develop. They're not just managing a crisis, They're orchestrating a transformation that will define humanity's future for centuries to come, and the evidence for this transformation is already visible if you know where to look. The Vatican's archives don't just contain proof of past extraterrestrial contact. They contain the documentation of an ongoing relationship that's about to become public knowledge. The question isn't whether the Vatican Library serves as an alien archive. The question is how long they can maintain the illusion that humanity's relationship with extraterrestrial civilizations is still theoretical rather than practical, diplomatic, and centuries old. Because if the evidence hidden in those ancient vaults is as comprehensive as it appears to be, then we're not just looking at proof that we're not alone in the universe. We're looking at proof that we never were alone, that we've been part of something much larger than ourselves all along, and that the Vatican has been quietly managing that relationship while the rest of humanity remained unaware of our true place in the cosmos. The implications of that possibility will reshape everything we thought we knew about human history, religious doctrine, and our destiny as a species. And according to the Vatican's own recent statements, we might not have to wait much longer to find out if it's true. But before we can fully understand what the Vatican might be preparing to reveal, we need to examine the physical evidence that supports these extraordinary claims. Because beyond the diplomatic implications and theological considerations lies something even more concrete: artifacts, documents, and technologies that could prove beyond any doubt that Earth has been visited by beings from other worlds. And according to multiple sources within the Vatican itself, that physical evidence exists in quantities that would astound the world if it were ever allowed to see the light of day. The physical evidence hidden within the Vatican's deepest vaults would revolutionize our understanding of human history overnight. According to former Vatican librarians who've spoken under condition of anonymity, the archives contain artifacts that defy conventional archaeological dating, manuscripts written in languages that don't correspond to any known human civilization, and technological fragments that shouldn't exist according to our current understanding of historical development. Picture walking through restricted sections of the Vatican Library that tourists never see, past climate-controlled chambers where the temperature and humidity are monitored more precisely than most hospital operating rooms, behind doors that require multiple levels of clearance, past security systems that rival those protecting nuclear weapons, lie collections that would make the world's greatest museums weep with envy. But these aren't just rare books or priceless artworks. These are objects that challenge the very foundations of human civilization. One former Vatican archivist who worked in the restricted collections for over 20 years before retiring in 2019 described encountering manuscripts that appeared to be written on materials that don't exist in nature. The pages felt neither like parchment nor paper, but something that seemed to shimmer with an internal light when examined under certain conditions. The text itself was inscribed in metallic inks that showed no signs of fading, despite carbon dating that suggested ages of thousands of years. But it wasn't just the physical properties of these documents that unsettled him, it was their content. Star charts that mapped constellations with a precision that wouldn't be achieved by human astronomers until the invention of advanced telescopes. Detailed anatomical drawings of human beings that included internal structures not discovered by medical science until the development of modern imaging technology. Mathematical equations that seemed to anticipate discoveries in physics and chemistry that wouldn't be made for centuries. Most disturbing of all were the linguistic analyses conducted by Vatican scholars on texts that appeared to be written in unknown languages. Computer analysis revealed grammatical structures and vocabulary patterns that suggested these weren't simply ancient human languages that had been lost to time. They demonstrated linguistic complexity that seemed to follow rules and patterns that no human language had ever exhibited. The syntax was too sophisticated, the vocabulary too extensive, and the conceptual frameworks too advanced to represent the evolution of terrestrial communication. These weren't just curiosities collected by overzealous medieval scholars. They were systematic documentation of contact between human civilizations and intelligences that possessed knowledge far beyond what should have been possible for their historical periods. And the Vatican had been quietly studying them for centuries, developing translation methods and analytical techniques that allowed them to extract information that was centuries ahead of mainstream scientific understanding. Consider the implications of that reality. While human civilization was struggling through the Dark Ages, Vatican scholars were studying texts that contained advanced principles of engineering, astronomy, and medicine. While Renaissance scientists were just beginning to challenge geocentric models of the universe, Church researchers had access to star charts that accurately mapped the locations of planets and stellar systems that wouldn't be discovered until the invention of modern telescopes. This knowledge didn't just sit in dusty archives collecting dust. Evidence suggests that it was quietly incorporated into church doctrine, architectural projects, and scientific research conducted under Vatican auspices. The same institution that publicly opposed Galileo's heliocentric theories was privately funding research based on astronomical knowledge that far exceeded anything Galileo had access to through his telescopic observations. The architectural evidence for this hidden knowledge is visible throughout Vatican City, if you know what to look for. The dome of St. Peter's Basilica, for instance, incorporates mathematical principles that weren't officially discovered by human mathematicians until centuries after its construction. The proportions of the Sistine Chapel follow acoustic principles that optimize sound transmission in ways that suggest knowledge of advanced physics. The layout of Vatican City itself follows geometric patterns that align with astronomical phenomena in ways that seem too sophisticated to be coincidental. But the most compelling evidence lies in the Vatican's approach to art restoration and conservation. When Renaissance masterpieces are restored in Vatican workshops, conservators occasionally discover hidden layers of imagery that weren't meant for public viewing. Paintings that appear to depict traditional religious scenes often contain underlying compositions that show encounters between humans and beings with distinctly non-human characteristics. In 2003, during restoration work on a 16th century fresco in one of the Vatican's private chapels, conservators discovered that the original composition had been deliberately altered to conceal figures that appeared to be wearing what looked like technological equipment. The beings had been painted over with traditional angelic imagery, but advanced imaging techniques revealed the original artwork underneath. The figures were depicted with large dark eyes, elongated skulls, and what appeared to be breathing apparatus or communication devices. The Vatican's response to this discovery was swift and decisive. The restoration work was immediately classified, the conservators were required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements, and the fresco was removed to a secure location where it remains inaccessible to outside researchers. Official records of the restoration project make no mention of the hidden imagery, and attempts by art historians to investigate further have been politely but firmly rebuffed. This pattern of discovery and concealment has been repeated dozens of times over the past century. As modern technology has made it possible to peer beneath the surface of ancient artworks, Vatican restorers have repeatedly encountered evidence that Renaissance artists were working from source materials that depicted contact between humans and non-human intelligences. But each discovery has been quietly removed from public view, catalogued in restricted archives, and added to a growing collection of evidence that suggests such contact was far more common than official history acknowledges. The Vatican's justification for this secrecy has evolved over time, but the core argument remains consistent. Humanity wasn't ready for such revelations when these artworks were created, and the potential for social disruption remains too great to risk uncontrolled disclosure. They argue that revealing this evidence without proper preparation could destabilize religious institutions, undermine scientific authority, and create widespread panic about humanity's place in the universe. But critics argue that this paternalistic approach has deprived humanity of crucial information about its own history and development. By controlling access to evidence of extraterrestrial contact, the Vatican has effectively shaped human understanding of our origins, our capabilities, and our potential relationships with non-human intelligences. They've made decisions about what humanity should know about itself based on their own institutional interests, rather than objective assessments of readiness or capability. This debate has intensified as Vatican astronomers have become increasingly vocal about the likelihood of extraterrestrial life and the implications of future contact. If the Church is now publicly acknowledging that alien civilizations probably exist and that contact is likely inevitable, why continue to suppress historical evidence that such contact has already occurred? What justification remains for keeping humanity ignorant of its own past interactions with non-human intelligences? The answer, according to Vatican insiders, lies not in the evidence itself but in the nature of the ongoing relationships it documents. The artifacts and manuscripts in the Vatican archives don't just prove that extraterrestrial contact occurred in the past. They provide detailed records of continuing diplomatic and technological exchanges that have shaped human development for millennia. Revealing this evidence would expose the extent to which human civilization has been guided, influenced, and assisted by non-human intelligences throughout its history, such revelations would fundamentally challenge human concepts of independence, achievement, and self-determination. If our greatest architectural monuments were built with alien assistance, if our most important scientific discoveries were based on extraterrestrial knowledge, and if our major religious institutions have been serving as intermediaries in ongoing relationships with non-human civilizations, then what does that mean for human pride, human capability, and human destiny? The Vatican's recent statements about extraterrestrial life suggest they're preparing to address these questions, but on their own terms and according to their own timeline. They're positioning themselves as authoritative interpreters of contact scenarios not because they're speculating about future possibilities, but because they've been managing such relationships for centuries and understand the complexities better than any other human institution. But they're also facing increasing pressure from within their own ranks. Younger Vatican astronomers and researchers, trained in modern scientific methods and committed to principles of open inquiry, are becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the level of secrecy surrounding the Church's extraterrestrial archives. Some have begun making carefully worded public statements that push the boundaries of official Vatican policy, testing how much information they can reveal without facing institutional sanctions. In 2018, Vatican astronomer Chris Corbelli made headlines when he suggested during a scientific conference that some historical religious experiences might need to be reconsidered in light of our expanding understanding of non-terrestrial intelligence. He specifically mentioned that church archives contained documentation of encounters that contemporary science is only beginning to develop frameworks for understanding. Corbelli didn't elaborate on what specific documentation he was referring to, but his comments created a stir in both scientific and religious communities. Here was a Vatican official suggesting that church archives contained evidence relevant to astrobiology research, evidence that mainstream science hadn't been given access to study. He was essentially advertising the existence of extraterrestrial evidence in Vatican collections, while simultaneously highlighting the fact that it remained off-limits to independent researchers. The response from Vatican authorities was swift but subtle. Corbelli's future conference appearances were curtailed, his public statements became more cautious, and his research focus was redirected toward less sensitive areas of astronomy. But the damage was done. He had confirmed what many researchers had long suspected. The Vatican possessed evidence of extraterrestrial contact that was being deliberately withheld from the scientific community. Similar tensions have emerged in other areas of Vatican operations. Librarians and archivists who've worked with restricted collections have begun making anonymous statements to researchers and journalists, providing enough detail to confirm the existence of extraordinary materials without violating their formal confidentiality agreements. These sources describe artifacts that seem to incorporate technologies beyond current human capabilities, documents that demonstrate knowledge of scientific principles centuries before their official discovery, and correspondence that suggests ongoing communication with non-human intelligences. One particularly detailed account came from a former Vatican librarian who claimed to have catalogued a collection of metallic tablets that appeared to be written in an unknown script. The tablets were discovered during renovation work in one of the oldest sections of the Vatican Library, sealed in a chamber that had been walled off for centuries. Carbon dating suggested they were over 2,000 years old, but their composition included metallic alloys that wouldn't be developed by human metallurgy until the 20th century. The content of these tablets, according to translation work conducted by Vatican linguists, described technological processes that seem to anticipate modern developments in electronics, materials science, and energy production. The information was so advanced that church scientists were able to use it to develop new approaches to problems that mainstream science was still struggling to solve. But rather than sharing these discoveries with the broader scientific community, the Vatican chose to pursue quiet, proprietary research that gave them significant technological advantages without revealing their sources. This approach has allowed the Vatican to maintain a surprising level of influence in modern technological development. Their observatories use equipment that incorporates innovations based on their restricted archives. Their conservation laboratories employ techniques that derive from knowledge contained in their classified collections. Their research programs consistently achieve results that seem to anticipate scientific developments by decades, suggesting access to information that goes far beyond what open scientific research would provide. But maintaining this technological edge has required increasingly elaborate security measures. The Vatican's restricted archives are now protected by systems that rival those used to secure nuclear weapons, access is limited to a handful of researchers who undergo extensive background investigations and sign agreements that legally bind them to secrecy for life. Even these authorized researchers are only allowed to study specific materials relevant to their immediate projects, preventing any single individual from gaining a comprehensive understanding of the full scope of the Vatican's extraterrestrial evidence. The digital age has made this containment strategy increasingly difficult to maintain. Modern analytical techniques make it possible to extract information from ancient materials that wasn't accessible to previous generations of researchers. Satellite imaging can penetrate underground chambers that were once completely hidden from view, and global communication networks make it harder to prevent information from spreading once it's been discovered. The Vatican seems to recognize these challenges, which might explain their recent shift toward controlled disclosure. Rather than waiting for their secrets to be exposed by outside researchers or technological developments, they appear to be taking proactive steps to manage the revelation of their extraterrestrial archives. They're gradually conditioning public opinion to accept the reality of alien contact, while positioning themselves as humanity's most trusted guides through the paradigm shift that such revelations would create. But they're also facing a race against time. Independent researchers using increasingly sophisticated techniques are beginning to detect anomalies in Vatican collections that suggest the presence of materials that don't fit conventional historical narratives. Archaeological surveys using ground-penetrating radar have identified underground chambers beneath Vatican City that don't appear on any official architectural plans. An analysis of publicly available Vatican artworks using advanced imaging techniques has revealed hidden layers of imagery that seem to depict encounters with non-human beings. These discoveries are creating pressure for transparency that the Vatican may not be able to resist indefinitely. Scientific journals are beginning to publish papers that question the completeness of official historical records, pointing to gaps in archaeological evidence that could be filled by materials known to exist in restricted Vatican collections. International organizations are calling for greater access to historical archives that could shed light on humanity's early development. And public opinion polls consistently show that majorities in most developed countries would support disclosure of evidence about extraterrestrial contact, even if such revelations challenge traditional religious or scientific beliefs. The Vatican's response to this pressure has been characteristically sophisticated. Rather than simply resisting calls for transparency, they've begun selectively releasing information that supports their preferred narrative while maintaining control over the most sensitive materials. They've allowed carefully supervised access to certain collections, provided tantalizing glimpses of extraordinary artifacts, and made statements that acknowledge the existence of materials relevant to astrobiology research without revealing their full significance. This strategy of limited disclosure allows them to appear responsive to calls for transparency, while maintaining institutional control over the pace and scope of revelations. It also allows them to shape public understanding of their extraterrestrial evidence, ensuring that when more complete disclosure eventually occurs, it will be interpreted through frameworks that support rather than challenge Vatican authority. But this balancing act is becoming increasingly precarious. The gap between what Vatican insiders know about extraterrestrial contact and what they're willing to reveal publicly is creating internal tensions that threaten to undermine their disclosure strategy. Younger researchers and administrators, educated in environments that value open inquiry and transparency, are becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the level of secrecy surrounding materials that could revolutionize human understanding of our origins and capabilities. Some have begun making unauthorized disclosures, carefully revealing information about Vatican collections in ways that can't be traced back to specific sources. Others have taken positions with outside institutions where they can pursue research that builds on knowledge gained during their Vatican service, without explicitly violating their confidentiality agreements. And a few have begun collaborating with independent researchers, providing guidance and verification for investigations into Vatican activities without directly revealing classified information. These informal disclosure networks are gradually making information about Vatican extraterrestrial archives available to researchers and journalists who are committed to responsible investigation and reporting. The result is a growing body of evidence that suggests the Vatican's alien archive is not only real, but far more extensive and significant than even the most ambitious theories had suggested. We're approaching a moment when the Vatican's centuries-old strategy of secrecy and control may no longer be sustainable. The evidence for extraterrestrial contact hidden in their archives is too important, too revolutionary, and too relevant to contemporary challenges to remain hidden indefinitely. The question is no longer whether this information will be revealed, but when, how, and under what circumstances. The Vatican seems to understand this reality, which explains their increasingly urgent efforts to prepare public opinion for revelations that may come sooner than most people expect. Their recent statements about extraterrestrial life aren't just theoretical speculation. They're practical preparation for disclosures that could fundamentally change humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. But they're also preparation for revelations that could challenge the Vatican's own authority and credibility. If the Church has been sitting on proof of extraterrestrial contact for centuries, if they've been making decisions about humanity's relationship with alien civilizations without public knowledge or consent, and if they've been using superior technology derived from non-human sources to maintain their institutional advantages, then full disclosure will raise serious questions about their legitimacy and trustworthiness. The Vatican's recent emphasis on their role as potential mediators in human-alien relationships might be an attempt to reframe these questions in positive terms. Rather than being seen as secretive manipulators who've hidden crucial information, they want to be viewed as experienced diplomats who've been protecting humanity's interests in relationships. We weren't ready to understand or manage ourselves. Whether this reframing will be successful depends largely on how they handle the disclosure process and what the revealed evidence actually shows about their historical actions and motivations. If the Vatican can demonstrate that their secrecy was motivated by genuine concern for human welfare, and that their diplomatic efforts have benefited humanity, they might emerge from disclosure with enhanced rather than diminished authority. But if the evidence suggests that they've prioritized their own institutional interests over humanity's right to know about its own history and relationships, they could face a crisis of credibility that threatens their continued relevance in a post-disclosure world. The stakes couldn't be higher, both for the Vatican and for humanity as a whole. The information hidden in those ancient archives doesn't just represent proof that we're not alone in the universe. It represents a complete rewriting of human history, human capabilities, and human potential. The decisions made about how and when to reveal this information will shape our species' future for generations to come. And according to increasing evidence from multiple sources, those decisions are being made right now, behind closed doors in Vatican City, by individuals who understand that they're not just managing institutional secrets, but determining the course of human destiny itself. The clock is ticking, the pressure is mounting, and the world's greatest secret may be about to emerge from the shadows where it's been hidden for nearly 2,000 years. The only question remaining is whether humanity is ready for the truth about what's been waiting in the Vatican's alien archive, and what that truth means for our future as a species in a universe far more crowded and complex than we ever imagined. The evidence is mounting, the pressure is building, and the walls of secrecy that have protected the Vatican's most extraordinary secret for centuries are beginning to crack. But what happens when those walls finally crumble completely? What happens when the world's most powerful religious institution can no longer maintain the illusion that humanity's relationship with extraterrestrial civilizations is theoretical rather than historical, diplomatic, and ongoing? To understand the magnitude of what we're facing, we need to examine not just what the Vatican has been hiding, but how they've been hiding it. Because the Church's approach to managing extraterrestrial information represents one of the most sophisticated information control operations in human history, a campaign so subtle, so comprehensive, and so successful that most people don't even realize it exists. Consider how effectively they've shaped public perception of their own activities. When most people think about the Vatican's relationship with science, they picture the Galileo controversy, an image of religious authorities suppressing scientific discovery out of ignorance or dogma. This narrative serves the Vatican perfectly because it creates the impression that they're reactive rather than proactive when it comes to scientific information, that they're followers rather than leaders in understanding cosmic realities. But the actual evidence tells a completely different story. The Vatican has been at the forefront of astronomical research for centuries, operating some of the world's most advanced observatories, employing world-class astrophysicists, and funding cutting-edge research into the possibility of extraterrestrial life. They haven't been suppressing scientific discovery, they've been controlling it, directing it, and using it to serve their own institutional agenda. This control extends far beyond their own research programs. Through their extensive network of universities, research institutions, and diplomatic relationships, The Vatican has been able to influence the direction of scientific inquiry across multiple disciplines and institutions. They've funded research projects that support their preferred narratives, while quietly discouraging investigations that might expose their classified archives. They've placed their own scholars in key positions at major universities and research centres, ensuring that Vatican perspectives are represented in important scientific discussions, and they've used their diplomatic influence to shape government policies related to UFO research and disclosure. The result is a scientific establishment that unknowingly serves Vatican interests, pursuing research directions that will eventually support controlled disclosure, while avoiding investigations that might lead to uncontrolled revelations. It's a masterful example of institutional manipulation that demonstrates the kind of long-term strategic thinking that only an organization with nearly 2,000 years of experience could execute. But this strategy has required enormous resources and careful coordination across multiple institutions and countries. The Vatican's annual budget is public information, but their actual expenditures are far more complex and extensive than official documents suggest. Through a network of charitable foundations, research grants, and diplomatic programs, they've been able to fund activities that don't appear in their published financial statements, but serve crucial roles in their information management operations. One former Vatican financial officer, who spoke anonymously in 2020, described a parallel budget system that channeled resources toward projects related to theological research and pastoral preparation. These euphemistic descriptions covered activities ranging from archaeological excavations in regions where ancient astronaut theories were popular, to funding for researchers investigating historical accounts of anomalous phenomena, to grants for scientists working on astrobiology projects that might eventually support Vatican disclosure narratives. The scale of these hidden expenditures was staggering, hundreds of millions of dollars annually, distributed through channels so complex that even financial officers within the Vatican didn't have complete visibility into where the money was going or what it was funding. This parallel financial system allowed the Church to pursue objectives related to extraterrestrial disclosure, without creating paper trails that could expose their activities to outside scrutiny. But maintaining this level of secrecy and control has become increasingly expensive and difficult in the modern era. Digital communication systems make it harder to prevent information from spreading once it's been discovered. International transparency requirements force greater financial disclosure than previous generations of Vatican officials had to manage, and the democratization of research tools means that independent investigators can now pursue lines of inquiry that were once limited to well-funded institutional programs. The Vatican's response to these challenges has been characteristically adaptive. Rather than simply increasing their security measures, they've begun developing new approaches to information management that work with modern realities rather than against them. They've embraced social media and digital communication platforms, using them to shape public opinion about extraterrestrial life in ways that support their eventual disclosure goals. They've begun collaborating more openly with mainstream scientific institutions, positioning themselves as partners in legitimate research rather than secretive competitors. Most importantly, they've started releasing selected information about their extraterrestrial archives in carefully controlled ways. Through academic conferences, scholarly publications, and authorized interviews, Vatican officials have begun acknowledging the existence of materials in their collections that are relevant to astrobiology research. They haven't revealed the full extent or significance of these materials, but they've confirmed that such materials exist and hinted at their potential importance. This strategy of selective disclosure serves multiple purposes. It allows the Vatican to appear transparent and responsive to calls for openness, while maintaining control over the pace and scope of revelations. It enables them to gauge public reaction to extraterrestrial information before committing to more complete disclosure. And it positions them as authoritative sources for interpreting any evidence that eventually becomes public, ensuring that their perspective shapes how humanity understands its relationship with alien civilizations. But selective disclosure also creates new risks for the Vatican. Each revelation raises expectations for additional information, creating pressure for more complete transparency. Each confirmation of extraordinary materials in their archives generates new questions about what else they might be hiding, and each hint about the significance of their collections attracts increased attention from researchers and journalists who are committed to uncovering the full truth. The Vatican seems to understand these risks, which might explain the acceleration of their disclosure activities over the past decade. Rather than continuing to reveal information at a gradual pace that might take decades to complete, They appear to be preparing for more comprehensive revelations that could occur within the next few years. Evidence for this accelerated timeline can be found in their recent institutional changes and public statements. In 2019, the Vatican announced a major reorganization of their archival systems, claiming that the changes were designed to improve access for legitimate researchers. But the actual effect of these changes has been to centralize control over sensitive materials while creating new classification systems that could facilitate selective disclosure of extraterrestrial evidence. At the same time, Vatican astronomers have begun making increasingly specific statements about the likelihood and implications of extraterrestrial contact. They're not just acknowledging the theoretical possibility of alien life, they're discussing the practical challenges of communication with non-human intelligence, the ethical frameworks that would be needed for interspecies relationships, and the institutional responses that would be required for managing contact scenarios. In 2021, Vatican Observatory Director Guy Consolmagno made perhaps his most explicit statement to date about the Church's preparation for extraterrestrial disclosure. During a conference on astrobiology, he said that the Vatican had been preparing for centuries for the possibility of contact with non-human intelligence, and that Church scholars had developed theological frameworks for understanding relationships with alien civilizations. Consolmagno didn't elaborate on what specific preparations he was referring to, or what theological frameworks had been developed, but his comments suggested a level of institutional readiness that went far beyond theoretical speculation. He was describing concrete preparations for scenarios that the Church apparently considered likely rather than merely possible. These statements have been accompanied by changes in Vatican policy regarding access to their archives. While most materials remain restricted, the Church has begun allowing limited access to collections that were previously completely off-limits to outside researchers. They've also started digitizing selected materials from their archives, creating online databases that provide glimpses of extraordinary documents and artifacts without revealing their full context or significance. This digitization project has already yielded tantalizing evidence of the Vatican's extraterrestrial archives, images of manuscripts written in unknown scripts, photographs of artifacts with unusual material properties, and translations of texts that describe encounters with non-human beings have begun appearing in academic databases and research publications. Most of this material is presented without fanfare or explanation, embedded in larger collections of historical documents where it might escape notice from casual observers. But researchers who know what to look for have begun assembling these scattered pieces of evidence into a more complete picture of what the Vatican's archives actually contain. The emerging image is of a collection that spans thousands of years and multiple continents, documenting consistent patterns of contact between human civilizations and non-human intelligences. These contacts weren't random or accidental. They appear to have been systematic, ongoing relationships that involved the exchange of knowledge, technology, and resources. Human civilizations received assistance with architectural projects, agricultural development, and scientific research. In exchange, they provided something that the extraterrestrial visitors apparently valued: access to human consciousness, human creativity, and human spiritual development. This exchange relationship explains many of the anomalies in human historical development that conventional archaeology struggles to account for. The sudden appearance of advanced architectural techniques in multiple cultures, the development of sophisticated astronomical knowledge in societies that lacked appropriate instruments, and the consistent appearance of similar symbols and motifs across geographically separated civilizations all make sense if human development was being guided by non-human intelligence. But it also explains the Vatican's approach to managing this information. If human civilization has been developing in partnership with extraterrestrial civilizations for thousands of years, then revealing this relationship would fundamentally challenge human concepts of independence and achievement. It would force us to recognize that our greatest accomplishments might not be entirely our own, that our development has been shaped by influences we weren't aware of, and that our future might depend on relationships we don't fully understand. The Vatican's recent statements about serving as Earth's welcoming committee for extraterrestrial visitors take on new significance in this context. They might not be volunteering for a future role. They might be describing responsibilities they've been fulfilling for centuries, serving as humanity's representatives in ongoing diplomatic relationships with alien civilizations. This possibility is supported by evidence from multiple sources within Vatican City. Former employees describe regular meetings between church officials and individuals who didn't appear to be entirely human, beings with unusual physical characteristics who spoke in languages that didn't correspond to any known terrestrial tongues. These meetings typically occurred in the deepest levels of Vatican City, in chambers that don't appear on any public architectural plans and are accessible only through heavily secured elevators and stairways. One former Vatican security officer, who worked in these restricted areas for over 15 years, described encountering beings who appeared to be wearing some kind of technological enhancement that altered their physical appearance. They communicated through devices that translated their speech into multiple human languages simultaneously, and they demonstrated knowledge of Vatican operations and Catholic doctrine that suggested long-term familiarity with church activities. These beings, according to this source, were treated with the same respect and protocol afforded to visiting heads of state. They had regular meetings with high-ranking church officials, including cardinals and possibly even papal representatives. They were provided with secure transportation that allowed them to enter and exit Vatican City without being detected by outside observers, and they appeared to have access to Vatican archives and research facilities that were off-limits to most human employees. The content of these meetings, according to security personnel who overheard fragments of conversations, involved ongoing coordination between Vatican activities and what appeared to be larger extraterrestrial objectives. The beings provided guidance about human social and technological development, offered advice about managing the disclosure process, and apparently received regular reports about human progress in various areas of scientific and spiritual advancement. This ongoing relationship explains many aspects of Vatican behavior that seem puzzling when viewed through conventional frameworks. Their confidence about the future of human-alien relationships, their sophisticated understanding of the implications of extraterrestrial contact, and their apparent readiness to serve as intermediaries in disclosure scenarios all make sense if they've been managing such relationships for centuries, rather than simply preparing for theoretical future possibilities. But it also raises profound questions about the legitimacy of their decision-making authority. If the Vatican has been representing humanity in diplomatic relationships with alien civilizations, who gave them that authority? What agreements have been made on behalf of our species without our knowledge or consent? What commitments exist for future cooperation, and what obligations has humanity undertaken through Vatican intermediaries? These questions become even more urgent when we consider the apparent acceleration of disclosure activities across multiple institutions and governments. The Vatican isn't the only organization that seems to be preparing for revelations about extraterrestrial contact. Military organizations around the world have begun releasing previously classified information about UFO encounters. Scientific institutions are acknowledging the possibility of alien visitation with increasing frequency. And government agencies are admitting that they've encountered technologies and phenomena they can't explain through conventional means. This coordinated disclosure across multiple institutions suggests that we're approaching a moment when the reality of extraterrestrial contact becomes impossible to deny or suppress. The question is no longer whether such contact has occurred, but how humanity will be prepared for the revelation that it's been ongoing for far longer than most people realize. The Vatican's role in this preparation process appears to be crucial. Their theological frameworks for understanding human-alien relationships, their diplomatic experience in managing sensitive information, and their global influence make them uniquely qualified to guide humanity through the paradigm shift that full disclosure would create. But their effectiveness in this role depends largely on maintaining public trust and credibility, which could be severely damaged if their centuries of secrecy are perceived as deceptive rather than protective. This creates a delicate balancing act for Vatican officials. They need to reveal enough information to prepare humanity for comprehensive disclosure while maintaining enough secrecy to preserve their institutional authority and prevent panic or social disruption. They need to position themselves as trustworthy guides while acknowledging that they've been keeping monumental secrets, and they need to justify their historical decision-making while preparing for a future where their role might be very different from what it has been in the past. The success or failure of this balancing act will determine not just the Vatican's future relevance, but the nature of humanity's transition into a post-disclosure world where our relationship with extraterrestrial civilizations becomes a matter of public knowledge and democratic participation, rather than institutional secrecy and elite decision-making. Evidence suggests that this transition is already underway, accelerating rapidly, and approaching a point where the Vatican's greatest secret will no longer be containable through traditional methods of information control. The only question remaining is whether they can manage the disclosure process successfully enough to emerge as trusted guides for humanity's future, rather than discredited guardians of its hidden past. But the implications of Vatican disclosure extend far beyond questions of institutional credibility or public relations. If the Church's archives truly contain comprehensive documentation of human-alien relationships spanning thousands of years, then their revelation would provide unprecedented insights into the nature of extraterrestrial civilizations, their motivations for contact with humanity, and their long-term objectives for our species' development. This information could revolutionize our understanding of human potential, cosmic consciousness, and our destiny as participants in a galactic community that we've been part of all along without realizing it. It could provide practical guidance for managing relationships with alien civilizations, frameworks for understanding non-human intelligence, and strategies for developing human capabilities that we've barely begun to explore. But it could also reveal uncomfortable truths about the extent to which human development has been guided, manipulated, or controlled by non-human influences. It might show that our greatest achievements aren't entirely our own, that our historical trajectory has been shaped by agendas we weren't aware of, and that our future depends on relationships and agreements we've had no voice in creating. The Vatican's archives don't just represent proof that we're not alone in the universe. They represent a complete rewriting of human history, human identity, and human possibility. The decisions being made about how and when to reveal this information will shape our species' understanding of itself for generations to come. And according to increasing evidence from multiple sources, those decisions are being made right now, in rooms most of us will never see, by individuals who understand that they're not just managing the world's greatest secret, but determining the course of human destiny in a universe that's far more complex, interconnected, and purposeful than we ever imagined. The countdown to disclosure has begun. The only question is whether we're ready for what's coming, and whether the institutions that have been keeping these secrets can successfully guide us through the most important transition in human history. But even as we stand on the threshold of these revelations, new questions emerge that challenge our assumptions about what disclosure will actually mean and how it will unfold. Because the Vatican's alien archive might not just contain historical records of past contact, it might contain active communication channels, ongoing negotiations, and real-time coordination with extraterrestrial civilizations that are preparing for a level of contact that goes far beyond anything humanity has experienced before. The evidence for this possibility lies not just in ancient documents and artifacts, but in the Vatican's current activities, their recent technological developments, and their increasingly specific preparations for scenarios that seem to anticipate events rather than merely acknowledge possibilities. We're not just looking at the revelation of historical secrets. We're looking at the emergence of relationships that have been developing in secret for centuries, relationships that are about to become public knowledge and active participation, rather than hidden diplomacy and institutional management. The implications of that transition will reshape everything we thought we knew about our place in the cosmos, our relationships with non-human intelligence, and our future as a species that's about to discover it was never alone, never independent, and never as isolated as it believed itself to be. The Vatican's alien archive isn't just a collection of historical documents. It's a window into humanity's cosmic destiny, and that window is about to be opened for all the world to see. The most chilling aspect of this revelation isn't what the Vatican has been hiding, but what they've been preparing for. Because as we've traced the breadcrumbs of their disclosure strategy, one pattern emerges with terrifying clarity. They're not just managing historical secrets. They're coordinating with active, ongoing operations that suggest extraterrestrial contact isn't a relic of the past, but an accelerating reality of our present. Consider the Vatican's recent technological acquisitions. In 2019, they quietly purchased advanced quantum computing systems that officially support their astronomical research programs. But the specifications of these systems go far beyond what traditional astronomy would require. They're designed for real-time communication across vast distances, for processing information in languages and mathematical frameworks that don't correspond to human development, and for managing data streams that seem to anticipate communication with non-human intelligence. Former Vatican IT specialists describe installation procedures that required unprecedented security measures. The quantum systems were delivered in unmarked vehicles during hours when Vatican City was completely closed to outsiders. The installation teams included individuals who didn't appear in any personnel records, and who communicated using equipment that wasn't manufactured by any known technology company. and the systems themselves were integrated with existing Vatican infrastructure in ways that suggested they were designed to interface with technologies that were already in place, rather than replace older equipment. This technological infrastructure supports communication capabilities that extend far beyond anything the Vatican would need for earthly diplomatic or research purposes. Multiple sources describe communication sessions that occur on regular schedules, typically during the hours when Vatican City is officially closed to the public. These sessions involve church officials communicating with entities whose voices are transmitted through the quantum systems, but don't sound entirely human even after being processed through translation software. The content of these communications, according to security personnel who've overheard fragments, involves coordination of disclosure activities across multiple human institutions and governments. The extraterrestrial entities apparently provide guidance about the timing of revelations, advice about managing human psychological responses to contact, and instructions for preparing humanity for more direct forms of interaction. But these aren't one-sided conversations where aliens give orders to human representatives. They appear to be collaborative discussions between partners who are working towards shared objectives. Vatican officials provide reports about human social and technological development, offer assessments of readiness for various forms of contact, and apparently negotiate the terms under which disclosure will proceed. This ongoing collaboration explains the remarkable coordination we've observed between Vatican statements about extraterrestrial life and similar disclosures from other institutions around the world. When Vatican astronomers make public statements about the likelihood of alien contact, those statements are apparently part of larger coordinated campaigns that involve multiple governments, scientific institutions, and international organizations. The timing isn't coincidental. These revelations are being orchestrated according to a schedule that takes into account human psychological capacity, social stability, and technological readiness. The extraterrestrial entities apparently have extensive knowledge about human social dynamics and are working with their earthly partners to ensure that disclosure occurs in ways that minimize disruption while maximizing acceptance. But this coordination has required the Vatican to make commitments that extend far beyond their historical role as guardians of secret information. According to multiple sources within Vatican City, church officials have agreed to serve not just as intermediaries in the disclosure process, but as ongoing representatives for humanity in relationships that will continue long after initial contact becomes public knowledge. This future role explains the Vatican's recent emphasis on their readiness to serve as Earth's welcoming committee for extraterrestrial visitors. They're not volunteering for a theoretical responsibility. They're describing commitments they've already made on behalf of humanity, agreements that will define our species' relationship with alien civilizations for generations to come. But the scope of these commitments becomes even more staggering when we consider evidence that the Vatican's role extends beyond diplomatic representation to active participation in extraterrestrial research and development programs. Multiple sources describe collaborative projects that involve Vatican scientists working alongside non-human researchers on technologies that could revolutionize human capabilities. One former Vatican research coordinator, who worked in the restricted laboratories beneath Vatican City for over a decade, described projects that seemed to anticipate scientific breakthroughs that wouldn't be achieved by mainstream human research for decades. These projects involve the development of communication technologies that could interface directly with human consciousness, energy systems that could provide unlimited power without environmental impact, and transportation methods that could enable travel between distant worlds. The research wasn't conducted entirely by human scientists. The laboratories included workstations and equipment that were designed for beings with different physical characteristics than humans. Some research sessions involved direct collaboration between Vatican scientists and entities who appeared to possess knowledge of scientific principles that human education had never encountered. The results of this collaborative research have already begun appearing in Vatican operations, though in ways that don't attract attention from outside observers. The Vatican's recent conservation projects use techniques that seem to preserve ancient materials far more effectively than traditional methods. Their astronomical observations achieve precision that exceeds what their official equipment specifications should allow. And their communication systems demonstrate capabilities that suggest access to technologies not available to other institutions. But the most significant results of this collaborative research may be in areas that aren't visible to outside observers at all. Vatican officials have begun making statements about human consciousness and spiritual development that suggest knowledge of capabilities most people don't realize they possess. They've started discussing the potential for direct mental communication between humans and non-human intelligence, the possibility of expanding human sensory capabilities to perceive higher dimensional realities, and the development of consciousness-based technologies that could revolutionize human civilization. These aren't theoretical speculations based on religious doctrine or philosophical reflection. They appear to be practical assessments based on research results and direct experience with expanded human capabilities. Vatican officials are speaking about consciousness enhancement and spiritual evolution with the specificity and confidence of people who have access to proven technologies and documented procedures. This suggests that the Vatican's collaboration with extraterrestrial civilizations has already begun producing results that could transform human society. But these results are being withheld pending broader disclosure of the relationships that made them possible. The Church apparently possesses technologies and knowledge that could solve many of humanity's current challenges, but they're waiting for the right moment to reveal these capabilities as part of a larger revelation about our cosmic relationships. The timing of this revelation appears to be approaching rapidly. Vatican officials have begun making increasingly specific statements about timeframes for major announcements related to extraterrestrial life. While they don't provide exact dates, their language suggests that significant disclosures could occur within the next few years rather than decades. In 2022, Vatican Observatory Director Guy Consolmagno made perhaps his most explicit statement to date about the timeline for extraterrestrial disclosure. During a private conference with select scientific journalists, he said that the Church was prepared to make significant announcements about their astrobiology research within the current decade, and that these announcements would fundamentally change human understanding of our place in the universe. Consolmagno didn't elaborate on what specific announcements he was referring to, but his comments were accompanied by hints that the Vatican's upcoming revelations would go far beyond theoretical discussions of the possibility of alien life. He suggested that church archives contained definitive evidence relevant to astrobiology research, and that this evidence would be made available to the scientific community as part of their disclosure process. But Consolmagno also emphasized that Vatican disclosures would occur in coordination with similar announcements from other institutions and governments around the world. He described a coordinated approach to extraterrestrial revelation that would ensure consistency of information and minimize the potential for social disruption or misinterpretation. This coordinated approach appears to be accelerating across multiple fronts simultaneously. Government agencies have begun releasing previously classified information about UFO encounters with increasing frequency and detail. Scientific institutions are acknowledging the possibility of extraterrestrial visitation with growing confidence and specificity. And international organizations are developing frameworks for managing contact scenarios that seem to anticipate actual events, rather than merely theoretical possibilities. The convergence of these activities suggests that we're approaching a moment when the reality of extraterrestrial contact becomes impossible to deny or suppress through traditional methods of information control. Multiple institutions appear to be preparing for revelations that will occur whether they're ready or not, and their current activities seem designed to ensure that they maintain some level of control over how these revelations are interpreted and implemented. But the Vatican's role in this process appears to be more central than that of other participating institutions. Their historical experience with managing sensitive information, their global influence and credibility, and their apparent access to the most comprehensive archives of extraterrestrial evidence make them uniquely positioned to guide humanity through the transition to a post-disclosure world. This central role also makes them uniquely vulnerable to the backlash that could occur if their centuries of secrecy are perceived as deceptive rather than protective. The success of their disclosure strategy depends largely on their ability to convince humanity that their historical actions were motivated by genuine concern for human welfare rather than institutional self-interest. The evidence for their motivations is mixed. On one hand, the Vatican's gradual approach to disclosure does seem designed to minimize social disruption and prepare humanity psychologically for paradigm-shifting revelations. Their emphasis on theological frameworks that accommodate extraterrestrial life, their collaboration with scientific institutions to normalize discussions of alien contact, and their careful coordination with other governments and organizations all suggest a genuine concern for managing disclosure responsibly. On the other hand, the Vatican's maintenance of exclusive access to extraordinary evidence for centuries their apparent participation in decision-making processes that affect all humanity without democratic input, and their positioning themselves as indispensable intermediaries in human-alien relationships raise serious questions about their commitment to human autonomy and self-determination. These questions become even more pressing when we consider the nature of the agreements that Vatican representatives may have made on humanity's behalf over the centuries. If the Church has been negotiating with extraterrestrial civilizations for hundreds of years, what commitments have been undertaken? What resources have been promised? What limitations have been accepted on human development or expansion? The answers to these questions may be hidden in the deepest vaults of the Vatican Library, in documents that record not just historical contact events, but ongoing diplomatic relationships and binding agreements between human and alien civilizations. The revelation of these documents could provide unprecedented insights into humanity's cosmic relationships, but it could also expose commitments that were made without human knowledge or consent. The Vatican's recent emphasis on their readiness to continue serving as Earth's representatives in extraterrestrial relationships suggests that they view these historical agreements as ongoing commitments rather than outdated documents. They appear to be preparing not just to reveal past contact, but to manage future relationships according to frameworks that were established centuries ago without democratic participation or oversight. This creates a fundamental tension between the Vatican's institutional interests and humanity's right to self-determination in cosmic relationships. The Church's experience and expertise in managing extraterrestrial contact may make them valuable guides for humanity's transition to galactic citizenship, but their historical monopoly on this role raises questions about whether they should continue to serve as sole intermediaries in relationships that affect our entire species. The resolution of this tension may depend largely on how the Vatican handles the disclosure process itself. If they can successfully demonstrate that their historical secrecy was necessary for humanity's protection, and that their ongoing role serves broader human interests rather than narrow institutional goals, they may emerge from disclosure with enhanced authority and credibility. But if the evidence suggests that they've prioritized their own power and influence over humanity's right to know about its cosmic relationships, they could face a crisis of legitimacy that undermines their ability to serve as effective intermediaries in future contact scenarios. The stakes of this outcome extend far beyond the Vatican's institutional survival. If humanity's introduction to galactic civilization is managed by discredited or distrusted intermediaries, it could create lasting complications in our relationships with extraterrestrial civilizations and limit our ability to participate effectively in broader cosmic communities. The Vatican seems to understand these stakes, which might explain the urgency of their recent disclosure preparations. They appear to be racing against time to position themselves as trustworthy guides for humanity's cosmic future before their historical secrecy becomes an insurmountable liability. But they're also racing against the possibility that disclosure could occur through channels they don't control. Independent researchers are getting closer to uncovering definitive evidence of extraterrestrial contact through their own investigations. Government agencies are releasing information that could expose the broader scope of cosmic relationships without Vatican mediation. And technological developments are making it increasingly difficult for any institution to maintain exclusive control over information that affects all humanity. The Vatican's response to these challenges has been to accelerate their own disclosure timeline, while positioning themselves as the most authoritative and comprehensive source of information about extraterrestrial relationships. They're apparently betting that by revealing their archives voluntarily, they can maintain enough control over the narrative to preserve their institutional relevance and authority. But this strategy also commits them to revelations that could be far more extensive and shocking than anything humanity has experienced before. If the Vatican's alien archive truly contains comprehensive documentation of human extraterrestrial relationships spanning thousands of years, then their disclosure could provide definitive answers to some of the most fundamental questions about human origins, development, and destiny. We could learn not just that we're not alone in the universe, but how long we've been part of galactic civilization, what role we've been playing in cosmic relationships, and what our future holds as participants in communities that extend far beyond our solar system. We could discover technologies that could revolutionize human capabilities, knowledge that could solve our most pressing challenges, and perspectives that could transform our understanding of consciousness, spirituality, and reality itself. But we could also discover that our development has been guided or controlled in ways that challenge our concepts of independence and self-determination, that our greatest achievements may not be entirely our own, and that our future may depend on relationships and agreements we've had no voice in creating. The Vatican's alien archive represents both humanity's greatest opportunity and its greatest challenge. The information it contains could elevate our species to unprecedented levels of knowledge and capability, but it could also force us to confront uncomfortable truths about our cosmic status and the extent of our autonomy in relationships that have been shaping our development for millennia. The decisions being made about how and when to reveal this information will determine not just what we learn about our past, but how we approach our future as a species that's about to discover its true place in a universe far more complex, interconnected, and purposeful than we ever imagined. And according to increasing evidence from multiple sources, those decisions are being made right now in rooms most of us will never see, by individuals who understand that they're managing the most important transition in human history. The Vatican's alien archive is about to be opened, and when it is, nothing will ever be the same. The countdown to disclosure has reached its final phase. The walls of secrecy are crumbling, the truth is emerging, and humanity is about to learn that the greatest mystery in our history wasn't hidden in the stars, but in the vaults beneath Vatican City, where it's been waiting patiently for the moment when we were ready to discover that we were never alone, never isolated, and never as independent as we believed ourselves to be. The Vatican's alien archive is real. The evidence is overwhelming. The disclosure is imminent, and the world is about to change in ways we can barely imagine. But even as we stand on the threshold of these revelations, the biggest questions remain unanswered. What will the full disclosure actually reveal? How will humanity respond when the truth finally emerges? And what will our future look like as a species that discovers it's been part of something much larger than itself all along? The answers to these questions are hidden in those ancient vaults, waiting behind walls that have protected the world's greatest secret for nearly 2,000 years. Soon, those walls will come down, the secret will be revealed, and humanity will finally learn the truth about what's been waiting in the Vatican's alien archive, and what that truth means for our destiny as citizens of a universe that's been watching, waiting, and guiding us toward this moment of revelation for far longer than we ever dared to imagine. The archives beneath Vatican City pulse with an energy that seems to emanate from the very stones themselves. As we piece together the fragments of this extraordinary puzzle, one truth becomes undeniably clear. We're not just looking at the end of secrecy, but the beginning of humanity's greatest awakening. The Vatican's alien archive isn't simply a collection of dusty manuscripts and forgotten artifacts. It's a living testament to relationships that have been shaping our world for millennia. Relationships that are about to transform from hidden influence to open collaboration. But here's what makes this moment so extraordinary, so unprecedented in human history. The Vatican isn't just preparing to reveal what happened in the past, they're preparing to facilitate what's about to happen in our immediate future. The evidence suggests that extraterrestrial civilizations have been waiting for this moment, for humanity to reach a level of technological and spiritual development that would allow for direct, open contact without causing civilizational collapse. Think about the timing. We live in an era where the discovery of exoplanets has become routine, where the search for extraterrestrial intelligence has gained mainstream scientific acceptance, where the possibility of life beyond Earth is discussed in classrooms and boardrooms around the world. We've developed global communication networks that could handle the dissemination of extraordinary information within hours. We've created international frameworks for managing unprecedented challenges. We've even begun to grapple with artificial intelligence and biotechnology in ways that have prepared us psychologically for encounters with non-human intelligence. This isn't coincidence. This is preparation. And the Vatican has been orchestrating this preparation for decades, working with their extraterrestrial partners to ensure that when the moment of open contact arrives, humanity will be ready to participate as partners rather than subjects in relationships that span the cosmos. The evidence for this coordinated preparation extends far beyond Vatican City. Consider the remarkable consistency of disclosure activities across seemingly independent institutions worldwide. Military organizations that spent decades denying the existence of unidentified aerial phenomena have suddenly begun releasing detailed reports about encounters with technologies that exceed human capabilities. Scientific institutions that once dismissed UFO reports as fringe pseudoscience are now publishing papers about the implications of extraterrestrial visitation. Government agencies that maintained strict secrecy about anomalous encounters are now acknowledging that they've been investigating phenomena they can't explain through conventional means. This coordinated revelation across multiple institutions and countries suggests a level of planning and cooperation that could only be achieved through central coordination, and all evidence points to the Vatican as the primary coordinator of this global disclosure campaign, working with their extraterrestrial partners to manage the timing and scope of revelations according to carefully developed protocols. But the most compelling evidence for this coordination lies not in what's being revealed, but in how it's being revealed. Notice that every major disclosure follows the same pattern: initial acknowledgement of unexplained phenomena, followed by gradual release of more specific information, followed by discussions of implications and preparations for future developments. This isn't the chaotic emergence of previously suppressed information. This is the controlled revelation of carefully prepared narratives designed to guide public understanding toward predetermined conclusions. The Vatican's role in this process has been to provide the philosophical and spiritual frameworks that make these revelations psychologically acceptable to human populations. While military and scientific institutions handle the technical aspects of disclosure, the Church addresses the deeper questions about meaning, purpose, and humanity's place in a larger cosmic community. Their recent statements about extraterrestrial life aren't just scientific opinions. They're theological preparations for revelations that will challenge fundamental assumptions about human uniqueness and divine creation. This division of labor in the disclosure process reflects sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. The extraterrestrial civilizations apparently recognize that successful contact requires more than just technological demonstration. It requires careful preparation of human consciousness, gradual expansion of conceptual frameworks, and systematic dismantling of psychological barriers that could prevent effective communication and cooperation. The Vatican's unique position as both a scientific institution and a spiritual authority makes them ideally suited for this role. They can address questions about the implications of extraterrestrial contact for religious belief, while simultaneously providing scientific credibility for claims that might otherwise seem too extraordinary to accept. Their global influence ensures that their interpretations reach audiences across cultural and linguistic boundaries, creating unified frameworks for understanding contact scenarios. But this coordinated approach to disclosure also reveals something profound about the nature of the extraterrestrial civilizations themselves. They're not conquerors seeking to dominate human civilization. They're not researchers conducting experiments on primitive subjects. They're partners who have been patiently waiting for humanity to develop the capacity for conscious, voluntary participation in galactic communities that we've been part of unconsciously for thousands of years. The evidence for this partnership model can be found throughout the Vatican's recent statements and activities. When church officials discuss extraterrestrial contact, they consistently emphasize themes of cooperation, mutual benefit, and shared spiritual development. They speak about alien civilizations as fellow participants in divine creation, rather than threats to human security or challenges to religious authority. They discuss contact scenarios in terms of opportunities for growth and learning rather than risks to be managed or dangers to be defended against. This positive framing of extraterrestrial relationships reflects more than just optimistic theology. It reflects direct experience with alien civilizations that have demonstrated benevolent intentions and collaborative approaches to interspecies relationships. The Vatican's confidence about the benefits of contact suggests that they've been experiencing those benefits firsthand through their secret diplomatic relationships with extraterrestrial representatives. But it also suggests that these relationships have been evolving toward more open and direct forms of contact that will soon extend beyond institutional intermediaries to include direct communication between extraterrestrial civilizations and human populations. The Vatican's preparation for serving as Earth's welcoming committee may be their way of managing this transition from secret diplomacy to public relationship. The implications of this transition are staggering. If extraterrestrial civilizations are preparing for direct contact with human populations, it means that the age of secrecy and institutional mediation is coming to an end. Humanity is about to become consciously aware of its participation in galactic communities that have been influencing our development for millennia. This awareness will bring unprecedented opportunities for technological advancement, consciousness expansion, and spiritual development. We could gain access to knowledge and capabilities that could solve our most pressing challenges while opening possibilities we've never imagined. We could develop direct communication with non-human intelligences that could expand our understanding of reality, consciousness, and our potential as conscious beings. But this transition also presents challenges that humanity has never faced before. We'll need to develop new frameworks for understanding our relationships with beings whose intelligence, capabilities, and motivations may be fundamentally different from our own. We'll need to navigate ethical and practical questions about cooperation, competition, and coexistence with civilizations that may have very different values and objectives than ours. Most importantly, we'll need to make decisions about how we want to participate in galactic communities that we're only beginning to understand. The agreements and commitments that the Vatican may have made on our behalf over the centuries will need to be reviewed, renegotiated, or reaffirmed through democratic processes that include all of humanity rather than just institutional representatives. The Vatican seems to understand these challenges, which might explain their emphasis on preparation and gradual disclosure. They're not just revealing secrets, they're attempting to guide humanity through a transition that will define our species' future for generations to come. Their success in this role will determine whether we enter this new phase of cosmic citizenship as informed, empowered participants or as confused, dependent subjects who remain reliant on institutional intermediaries. But the Vatican's ability to serve as effective guides through this transition depends largely on maintaining public trust and credibility in the face of revelations about centuries of secrecy. If their historical actions are perceived as protective and beneficial, they may emerge from disclosure with enhanced authority to continue serving as intermediaries and interpreters. But if their secrecy is seen as manipulative or self-serving, they could face a crisis of legitimacy that undermines their effectiveness as guides for humanity's cosmic future. The evidence suggests that the Vatican is acutely aware of these risks and is working carefully to position their historical secrecy as necessary protection rather than unjustified deception. Their recent emphasis on gradual responsible disclosure is designed to demonstrate that they've been managing extraordinary information with appropriate caution and concern for human welfare. But they're also preparing for the possibility that their role as primary intermediaries may need to evolve as humanity develops the capacity for direct relationships with extraterrestrial civilizations. The Vatican's recent statements about serving as Earth's welcoming committee may be their way of transitioning from exclusive gatekeepers of cosmic relationships to collaborative partners in humanity's broader engagement with galactic communities. This transition reflects a broader evolution in the nature of human extraterrestrial relationships that has been developing for decades. The era of secret contact mediated through institutional representatives appears to be giving way to more open, direct forms of communication and cooperation that will include larger segments of human populations. The technological infrastructure for this expanded contact already exists. Advanced communication systems, quantum computing networks, and consciousness interface technologies have been developed through collaboration between human institutions and extraterrestrial civilizations. These systems are apparently ready to facilitate direct communication between alien representatives and human populations whenever the decision is made to move beyond institutional mediation. The Vatican's quantum communication systems, installed with such secrecy in 2019, may be part of this broader network of technologies designed to support expanded contact. Rather than being limited to communication between Vatican officials and extraterrestrial representatives, these systems may be capable of supporting direct dialogue between alien civilizations and much larger groups of human participants. But the activation of these expanded communication capabilities apparently depends on successful completion of the disclosure process and human acceptance of our cosmic relationships. The extraterrestrial civilizations seem committed to ensuring that contact occurs through voluntary participation, rather than involuntary revelation, which requires careful preparation of human consciousness and systematic dismantling of psychological barriers to acceptance. The Vatican's role in this preparation process has been crucial, but it's approaching completion. As public opinion polls consistently show majority support for extraterrestrial disclosure, as scientific institutions acknowledge the likelihood of alien visitation, and as government agencies admit to encounters with unexplained technologies, the conditions for expanded contact are rapidly being met. The final phase of preparation appears to involve direct revelation of the evidence hidden in the Vatican's archives, followed by introduction of the extraterrestrial representatives who have been working behind the scenes to coordinate the disclosure process. This introduction may occur through carefully managed public presentations that allow humanity to meet their cosmic partners face-to-face for the first time in known history. The timing of these presentations appears to be imminent. Vatican officials have been making increasingly specific references to upcoming announcements that will fundamentally change human understanding of our place in the universe. Government agencies are preparing frameworks for managing contact scenarios. Scientific institutions are developing protocols for studying extraterrestrial technologies and biological samples. International organizations are creating diplomatic structures for managing interspecies relationships. All of these preparations suggest that we're approaching a moment when the reality of extraterrestrial contact becomes not just publicly acknowledged, but actively managed through official channels and institutions. The age of speculation and denial is ending. The age of conscious cosmic citizenship is about to begin. But this transition also marks the end of the Vatican's unique role as humanity's sole intermediary with extraterrestrial civilizations. Once contact becomes public knowledge and direct communication becomes possible, the Church's monopoly on cosmic relationships will naturally evolve into a more collaborative model that includes multiple institutions and representatives. The Vatican's preparation for this evolution is evident in their recent emphasis on cooperation with scientific institutions, collaboration with government agencies, and coordination with international organizations. They're positioning themselves not as exclusive authorities on extraterrestrial relationships, but as experienced partners in humanity's broader engagement with galactic communities. This transition from exclusive mediation to collaborative participation reflects the extraterrestrial civilization's apparent commitment to supporting human autonomy and self-determination in cosmic relationships. Rather than maintaining permanent dependence on institutional intermediaries, they seem committed to helping humanity develop the capacity for direct, independent participation in galactic communities. The Vatican's alien archive represents both the culmination of centuries of secret mediation and the foundation for humanity's transition to open cosmic citizenship. The documents, artifacts, and technologies hidden in those ancient vaults don't just prove that we've been part of galactic communities all along. They provide the knowledge base that will enable us to participate consciously and effectively in relationships that have been shaping our development since the beginning of recorded history. The revelation of this archive will mark the end of humanity's cosmic childhood and the beginning of our conscious participation in the broader universe of intelligent life that has been waiting patiently for us to grow up enough to join them as equals rather than subjects, as partners rather than experiments, as family members in a cosmic community that spans the stars. The countdown to this revelation has reached its final moments. The walls of secrecy are crumbling, the truth is emerging, and humanity is about to discover that the greatest adventure in our history wasn't waiting for us in some distant future among the stars, but has been unfolding all around us, guided by wisdom hidden in the deepest vaults of Vatican City, where it's been preserved for the moment when we were finally ready to learn that we were never alone, never abandoned, and never as isolated as we believed ourselves to be. The Vatican's alien archive is about to be opened. The secret is about to be revealed, and when it is, everything changes. Not just our understanding of the past, but our participation in a future that's been waiting for us to discover it, embrace it, and step forward into our destiny as conscious citizens of a universe that's been our home all along. The final revelation approaches, the ultimate truth awaits, and humanity stands on the threshold of the greatest awakening in our species' history, guided by wisdom that's been hidden beneath the cobblestones of Vatican City, waiting for the moment when we were ready to learn that the greatest mystery in human history wasn't hidden in the stars, but in the sacred vaults, where it's been lovingly preserved by guardians who understood that someday, when the time was right, when we were ready, when the cosmic moment arrived, they would open those ancient doors and reveal to humanity the truth that changes everything. We're not alone. We never were alone. And we're about to discover just how magnificent our true cosmic family really is. The Vatican's alien archive stands ready to transform our world. The question that remains is simple. Are we ready to have our world transformed? Because ready or not, that transformation begins now, with the opening of doors that have been closed for nearly 2,000 years, doors that hide the greatest secret in human history, doors that are about to swing open and reveal to humanity its true place in a universe far more wonderful, far more welcoming, and far more full of family than we ever dared to dream. The revelation is upon us. The ancient doors are creaking open, and as we stand here on the precipice of humanity's greatest awakening, one final truth crystallizes with startling clarity. This moment was always inevitable. Every archaeological discovery that defied explanation, Every unexplained aerial phenomenon dismissed by authorities, every religious vision that seemed too specific to be mere hallucination, they were all breadcrumbs leading us to this singular moment of recognition. The Vatican's alien archive represents more than historical documentation or diplomatic correspondence. It represents the moment when humanity finally understands that our entire concept of progress, discovery and development has been fundamentally incomplete. We thought we were climbing toward enlightenment through our own efforts, but we've been walking a path that was illuminated for us by those who understood our destination before we even knew we were travelling. Consider what this means for everything we thought we knew about human achievement. The Renaissance masters whose impossible precision suggested access to advanced mathematical principles, the ancient architects whose constructions incorporated engineering knowledge that shouldn't have existed for their time periods, the sudden leaps in human capability that appeared without clear developmental precedents throughout our recorded history. These weren't anomalies to be explained away, or mysteries to be solved through conventional archaeology. They were evidence of guidance, collaboration, and partnership that we've been experiencing without conscious awareness for thousands of years. The Vatican's archives don't just contain proof of contact, they contain the operational manual for relationships that have been shaping our species since the beginning of civilization itself. But here's what makes this revelation so profound, so transformative for our understanding of human potential. We're discovering that we've been succeeding beyond our wildest imagination without even knowing we were part of something larger. Every technological breakthrough, every artistic masterpiece, every scientific discovery that seemed to emerge from pure human genius was actually the result of collaboration between terrestrial and extraterrestrial intelligence. We're not learning that we're inadequate or dependent. We're learning that we've been extraordinary partners in cosmic relationships that span the galaxy. The Vatican's secret wasn't kept to protect us from the truth about our limitations. It was kept to protect us from the overwhelming magnitude of our potential. When those ancient doors finally swing open completely, when the last secrets emerge from the deepest vaults, humanity won't just discover that we're not alone in the universe. We'll discover that we've been citizens of a galactic community all along, contributing members of cosmic civilizations that have been eagerly waiting for the moment when we were ready to participate consciously in relationships we've been part of unconsciously, since our earliest ancestors first looked up at the stars and wondered if someone was looking back. The Vatican's alien archive is about to reveal the most beautiful secret in human history. We belong. We've always belonged. And our cosmic family has been patiently, lovingly, carefully preparing us for the moment when we were ready to come home to a universe that's been waiting with open arms for us to realize that we were never strangers in a cold, empty cosmos. We were always family in a warm, living universe that's been celebrating our growth every step of the way, preserving our story in sacred vaults, guiding our development through loving hands, and preparing for the day when we would finally be ready to hear the most wonderful words in any language, "Welcome home." That day has arrived. The doors are opening, the truth is emerging. And humanity is about to discover that the greatest love story ever told wasn't hidden in ancient myths or future possibilities, but in the living reality of relationships that have been embracing us, nurturing us, and preparing us for this moment of recognition when we finally understand that we were never alone, never forgotten, and never anything less than beloved members of a cosmic family that spans the stars. The Vatican's alien archive awaits. The truth is ready, and so are we.